It just doesn't get old. I don't care how many we've had. I don't care how many we will have. I'm Matthew Ivanhoe, founder of the Cultivated Collector, and thank you for joining us for a very, very special episode of Automobiles of Distinction. We're gonna be talking about one of my favorites, the Ferrari F40. I mean, I was obsessed with cars from a very, very young age, and my parents bought me this book that it was just called Hot Cars, and it had a 288 in it. It had many cars in it. Had a 959, had all sorts of stuff in it. But I was 3 years old, and the F40 had just come out, and I remember just sitting there and looking and obsessing about this thing, and here I was getting to drive this car. I was 20 years old, and I was hanging out with a gentleman who was one of my mentors in this business. It was really quite simple. We were moving a bunch of cars to a local client's house, and he needed help moving the cars. I mean, an F40 was never inexpensive. You would never have called it cheap, but there was a time where an F40 was nowhere near as expensive as it is now. The F40 was not as special as the 250 short wheelbase Berlinetta that he was driving to the client's house, or the 250 Boano that his sales guy was driving to the house. Those cars were more expensive, more significant, more special to him. And it was really by the grace of God that I got to drive the F40, because otherwise I would have been on shuttle duty. And so the car I drove, it was a US spec car. We get out on this local road that's sort of like a quasi highway in and of itself, and I let him get a little bit of speed, and I just rolled into the throttle, and I will never forget that first time of hearing the turbo spool, hearing that whoosh, and then it coming on boost, and the car just sitting down, riding that lightning all the way through, all the way to red line and pulling third gear. I was hooked. I was absolutely hooked. It's an absolutely incredible thing, and that experience set me down a path that I think really brought me to where I am today. Pure elemental, raw, visceral things. This car, to a 15 or 20-year-old, slack-jawed awe. It still creates just unbridled excitement, and what's fascinating to me about this car, this shape, and a bunch of the supercars of this era, the Countach is the same, and in some ways even more so than this. It still evokes absolute shock and awe in the youth. And that's one thing that it may sound silly, but it matters. For how many people this car is it. And it spans a huge range. You have baby boomers. When this car was new, they were relatively young and coming up in their careers who want to have one. All the way down to Gen Zers who weren't even born when this car came out. That's a huge range. You have a 50-year span of people who love this thing. So yes, are they expensive? Of course they are. There's a good reason why. Ferrari has consistently, and even before they were a constituent company as Ferrari, Enzo Ferrari had an uncompromising vision to be the best, to be the most successful in racing, which began with him leading Alfa Romeo's works race team, the Scuderia Ferrari. Enzo Ferrari had the mind of a pure racer, and one of the oldest adages in racing is, in order to finish first you have to finish. If you're pushing hard with something that's unproven and untested, you're bound to have a failure. The thing that really honestly defined Ferrari, believe it or not, was reliability, was consistency. That's what defined the cars, and he would find the most promising drivers out there to push these reliable things to their bleeding edge. How does that get us to F40? You have a legacy of massive achievement, of just incredible motorsport success that is defined by uncompromising vision along with reliability and consistency. And that, to me, is really the core of what defines Ferrari's golden age. And the F40, as being one of the last cars that Enzo Ferrari signed off on before he died, embodies that. It really does. It is a car that pushed to the bleeding edge of what was possible at the time, but did so with technology that frankly was not that advanced. So in the proper telling of the F40 story, we have to go back to another place that we at Cultivated love, which is, of course, Group B. The Group B era produced some of the cars that are nearest and dearest to our hearts. But one misconception that people have is that Group B was rally. The most visible portion of Group B was rally. But Group B was really a formula for producing a car for a racing series. There was supposed to be an adoption of Group B circuit, which the 288 GTO was built to homologate a car for Group B circuit, not rally. And that never came. It never came, it never caught on. Without the 288, there would be no F40. There would be no F50, there would be no Enzo, Ferrari, any of the other cars that millions and millions of people adore. The 288 GTO is your daddy. You can trace a direct lineage there. Now, the 959, there are aspects of the 959 that were somewhat antiquated, but that was really limited more by development and budget than it was by mentality. I mean, the 959 was a technological exercise in many ways. It was pushing everything to the bleeding edge of what was possible at that time. And the F40, in many ways, was almost the opposite. I mean, you look at the chassis, and the chassis it's amazing, it's incredible. And it's also the same type of thing that you saw in race cars of the 60s and 70s. Is that a bad thing? No. It means that it's great. It means that it works. A 959 you drive, and you have to contextualize what you're doing. You have to think about the fact that, okay, in 1987, this was an insanely impressive car. Because when you drive a 959, it is so refined and accessible and easy and modern that you have to remember that this was very impressive back then. While an F40 has, by its nature, because it's really stripped out and just consists of just race car goodness, it still feels wild and crazy and exotic and thrilling and wonderful today. A 959, you have to remember, okay, 1987, this is impressive. An F40 is impressive right now. It just doesn't get old. I don't care how many we've had. I don't care how many we will have. It is one of our favorite cars here. It just is. It's a fantastic car. If we could only have one, it's a really short list car. It's just fantastic. The driving experience is, in my humble opinion, of the Ferrari Supercar lineup, it's the best. I prefer it to 288 GTO. I way prefer it over an F50, over to an Enzo. It's wonderful. And then we're not even getting into what this car represents. World's first 200-mile-an-hour road car. And the other thing to think of, I mean, this car is such an icon. There's a reason why it's so desirable. There's a reason why, even though it's the most numerous of the Ferrari supercars, that it's still very desirable and expensive. Are there plenty of cars today that'll beat it in a straight line? Of course there are. It's not the point. The way that it delivers its performance, the way that it delivers the experience is so visceral, so raw, so engaging, so charismatic that, yeah, fine, of course there are faster cars out there, and you just don't care. It doesn't matter. Okay, go ahead, whatever. I'm having more fun, straight up. And isn't that why we love cars? I mean, do you want to drive your magazine? Do you want to drive your stats on the internet? No. You want to drive your car. This is a car that you drive. It's not driving you. That is what makes it so magnificent. It is old school in the best possible ways. I mean, it's old school turbo stuff. You have to wait for those turbos to kick, and when they do, it's drop kicking you in the back. It's wonderful. It's got so much character. The steering, it's just It's telepathy. You just think about where you want to go, and it's already going in that direction. It's manual steering. It's not power steering. The way that God Enzo Ferrari intended. It's like mind melding with something. You wind up becoming one with the car, and that's what makes it so wonderful. In my opinion, there aren't that many cars that you can really have that with. There just aren't. An F40 is having just the right amount of wasabi on your sushi. It's a little spicy, but not eating a whole glob by itself. Some of the cars we love here, some people would think that it's like just eating a glob of wasabi. Maybe we love that, we can stomach it. But an F40, despite its incredible raw and visceral nature, is still something that's relatively easy. It's relatively accessible. It does have air conditioning. Is it the best air conditioning? No. But you don't expect it to be. If you want to have one of the most engaging driving machines that money can buy, absolutely iconic, legendary car that will actually surprise you in how civil it's capable of being, you'll be hard pressed to find a better thing. Guys, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Automobiles of Distinction. As you can tell, the F40 is so near and dear to our hearts, and it really means a lot to us that you came to check it out today. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm Matthew Ivanhoe, founder of the Cultivated Collector. Thank you so much for stopping by.